Welcome to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, where you don't need to expect us. We're already here and coming at you now. It is Evolution with Miss Eva Moore.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. It's Eva. I'm back in action. Merry Christmas, everyone. I hope everyone's had a good Christmas season leading up here. It's been quite intense and beautiful at the same time. The price of gas is drastically dropping. The cost of...
Hi, Eva.
Hi, Scott. And tonight my guest is Scott Bennett. And we're going to be talking about his amazing...
You hear me okay?
I can hear you just fine. Can you hear me? Can you hear me okay? Can you hear me, Scott?
I can hear you now.
Okay, great. Welcome to the show, Scott. Thanks for being here today, and we're going to be talking about your amazing journey here in your whistleblowing adventures and the courage under fire that you've exhibited and that you're still exhibiting to this day. And it's a pleasure to have you, so thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on. I appreciate it very much.
Okay, so to start, I think what I would start with is this story kind of climaxes while you're incarcerated in federal prison, and you get partnered into the same facility with Brad Birkinshaw. Is that how you say his last name?
Birkenfeld,
sorry.
Yes.
And can you, for the audience, for somebody that doesn't understand who Brad is and the importance of his story, can you just give us a little bit of background? Because he's quite the character.
Sure. Brad Birkenfeld is... He's an American citizen who became a Swiss banker. He worked overseas in Switzerland. Grew up on the East Coast. His father was a neurosurgeon, very intelligent man. He went over in the 90s, and he was working for a variety of banks, a variety of Swiss banks, and eventually took a position at Union Bank of Switzerland. And he had begun discovering nefarious activities within the Swiss bank community, specifically UBS, a lot of political skullduggery that involved high-level congressmen and senators. He challenged a lot of the Union Bank of Switzerland executives about some of the activities that were going on, and a lot of the hidden accounts and a lot of things that it just struck him as problematic and unconstitutional and things of that nature. I know Senator Phil Gramm was one of the politicians that he called out on the floor, and there were a lot of Hollywood liberal elites who had Swiss banking accounts that were undisclosed and not paying in taxes, besides a variety of terrorist finance accounts that were going through Union Bank of Switzerland, being money laundered into a variety of activities in the Middle East. And Brad had challenged Union Bank of Switzerland on this and had begun to make a case that was going to be reported to the U.S. authorities. And he got in a lot of conflict, a lot of hot water with UBS. But to make a long story short, he had been approached by the Central Intelligence Agency when he was in Geneva, Switzerland, to begin giving them information, begin serving as an intelligence source. And that culminated and climaxed in an episode where Brad was lured into a social event drinking experience where he went out with some people that he didn't know were in the CIA at the time and was caught up in a drunk driving episode. He was entrapped with it, I should say. And he was taken into a Swiss jail, and the next day the CIA operative who had lured him into this DUI trap, had come into the jail and got him out of prison, flashed his CIA badge, and got him out. And all of this Brad told me and told others that when I had met him much later. And he couldn't believe it. He had never worked in the intelligence circles or any of these agencies, so he was sort of, a duck out of water. And I think he got a whiff that they were trying to recruit him, and he knew his entire livelihood would be at risk within the Swiss banking community. He could be put in jail in Switzerland if he betrayed any secrets. So he basically packed his bags and his case and took all of the intelligence that he had and came over to the United States and started to try and report this matter directly to the Department of Justice. Eric Holder, Lanny Brewer, who were the head chiefs of the DOJ at the time. I recall he had meetings with Kevin Downing and a Kevin O'Connor, who were attorneys at the Department of Justice, and he was basically laughed out. He was shut down. He was ignored. And I think what had happened, being someone who's experienced with the intelligence circles, the CIA were working in conjunction with the Department of Justice and trying to shut him down and trying to contain a lot of the material that he had. So they refused to give him a subpoena. They refused to allow him to provide the information that he had. And instead of waiting around for them, he ran over to the IRS and tried to get a subpoena to provide material. They refused to give it to him. Then he went to the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission, and they refused to give it to him. Finally, the Senate gave him a subpoena, and he was at that point allowed to come in and give a lot of the material behind closed doors under seal. But it was quite an episode, and Brad had also conveyed that a very strange thing had happened involving the Department of Justice and CIA and these groups. And that was that a London banker friend of Brad's from the Union Bank of Switzerland had been notified by Union Bank of Switzerland that they had received a letter signed by Brad's friend alleging that Brad was giving intelligence to the U.S. authorities. And his friend said, "I never sent you any such letter." And UBS sent the guy the letter. His name was Mohammed something. He was a London banker, but he was Middle Eastern in name. And his friend got a copy of this letter, faxed or sent to him by UBS, and it said July 2007. Didn't say July 15th or July 1st. It said July 2007. And it didn't have his signature. It just had his name typed, and the letter said, "Brad Birkenfeld is giving materials. You need to be aware of this." And he sent it to Brad and said, "I never wrote this letter. I don't know who did." And what we concluded was that when Brad went into the Department of Justice, the only way that they could have known that Brad knew this person was if they tapped his phone and fabricated this letter. So right then and there, Brad was a walking example of the NSA, CIA, Department of Justice, tapping a phone and forging a letter with the hope that he was going to be nailed, killed, or imprisoned by the Swiss authorities for giving this information to the American authorities. And then a lot of this came out much later. Brad had shared with me WikiLeaks cables that Julian Assange's organization had dug up, and they came from the Department of State counterterrorism office, and they described the Department of State under Hillary Clinton working in conjunction with the Department of Justice in getting Swiss treaty benefits and putting together a deal to basically hang Birkenfeld because he had exploded onto the scene all of this material dealing with Swiss banks and terrorist financing and hidden accounts. Now, what makes all that significant was Brad had come over to the United States, tried to give this material to the Senate, tried to give it to the Department of Justice, and no one took it from him, and instead they imprisoned him. What was significant is my job in the military and as a contractor in Booz Allen Hamilton was to track down those very sources of terrorist financing, those bank accounts. And when I discovered all this, when Brad shared it with me and showed me the accounts, showed me the WikiLeaks cables, showed me all of his materials, I said, you're telling me no one from the Department of Justice, no one in the military, the Department of State, or the CIA ever sat down with you and debriefed you to see its applications to military missions, military operations? He said, never, not once. No one in uniform, no one in any agency, no one in the military ever sat down with me and debriefed me on all this material. You are the first one. And I said, well, that's exactly what my job was. And had I met you before, I could have emptied your pockets, and in one night, we could have tracked down 90% of all these terrorist finance accounts. And the fact that that never happened is either severe incompetence or a cover-up or a conspiracy or corruption. And that's how Brad and I started piecing all this together.
I think that's amazing. Just the fact that the serendipitous nature of the two of you ending up, the very person who was fighting to give his testimony ends up partnered with the very person who is, positioned to receive this type of testimony, and yet it happens under the guise and cover of, federal indictment and incarceration. And so it's just very it's a beautiful story in and of itself, and it's one that most people have not even heard of.
Yeah.
They're just only now starting to hear about Snowden. And so
yes.
Just to kind of draw the points of access of connection here, the way that this rolls out is right now there's a lady by the name of Jessalyn Raddick who is representing Snowden, one of his legal team. And she works for an organization called GAP, Government Accountability Project. Now, Jessalyn Raddick is representing Snowden, but also was successful in representing Brad.
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
So the fact that Brad did get to a place where he finally did receive somebody to fairly represent him, and would you say that he was successfully represented? Well,
when Brad and I ended up in the same prison together, which you couldn't make up, it was a miraculous turn of events, and we wind up in the same prison, and we start to connect the dots. We start to discover all this information, and he says, there's a gal representing me named Jessalyn Raddick. She's put my wiki page together. She's out working with my attorneys to get all this reversed and all this known. You need to make contact with her. You need to connect with her and provide all of your military expertise so on the outside we can get a Senate hearing and pull you in to say, this is the man who knows all the military dimensions of the terrorist financing accounts that I tried to bring to you, that you've thrown me in jail and you've never allowed to even be heard. So please give me a Senate hearing, and by the way, bring this guy, Scott Bennett, in, and he'll tell you, because I'm not the expert in military stuff, Scott Bennett is. So that was the plan. Brad was networking that through Jessalyn Raddick and his lawyers, Stephen Cohn, David Cohn, and Stephen Colapinto. They're Cohn, and Colapinto, this law firm in Washington, D.C., and there's some funny business there because Stephen Cohn and David Cohn are brothers. One Cohn is at Gap, and the other one is in charge of this Cohn and Colapinto law firm in D.C. And there are some real funny crossovers there. But I wrote Jessalyn Raddick. She contacted an attorney of mine in Washington, D.C. named Jeff O'Toole, and Brad was passionate to say, you need to connect with this guy. You need to talk to him. And I wrote her, and I sent his lawyers materials and documents establishing who I was and information that was unclassified about the work I did in terrorist financing. And I said, all of this is extremely relevant because soldiers are being killed because of all these finance accounts. They haven't been shut down, and we need to track this. I know it because that was my job. I know this world. And Jessalyn Raddick did absolutely nothing. And I was flabbergasted. His lawyers did absolutely nothing. Why? Either they were paid off or warned by CIA and others, or they were just, severely stupid and incompetent. I think they were paid off because On September 11th, 2012, the same day as Benghazi, Brad Birkenfeld was paid $104 million. And prior to that, on August 1st, Brad got out of prison, and we together submitted a letter to General James Mattis, the commander of U.S. Central Command, and it said, "My name is Brad Birkenfeld. I'm the Swiss banker. I've brought all this information to the Department of Justice, Eric Holder, Lanny Brewer, and Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, and none of this material has ever been shared with you, General Mattis. Please debrief me immediately so I can provide this intel for you. And here are all the people that are involved: Booz Allen Hamilton, Troy Hensley, Dov Zakheim, Bill Lubliner, et cetera, et cetera." And that letter went to General Mattis. And it was 1 month after that that Brad was paid, on September 11th, 2012, the same day as Benghazi, which is very suspicious. Now, Jesselyn Radick has since become Edward Snowden's lawyer. Now, what's significant is Brad Birkenfeld, when he was in the DUI situation in Switzerland, Edward Snowden was a CIA analyst in Geneva, Switzerland. And Ed Snowden described to Glenn Greenwald in his article to The Guardian when he first came out in May of 2013 that one of the moments of turning Snowden against the intelligence agencies because of their corruption was seeing what they did to the Swiss banker Brad Birkenfeld in Switzerland by getting him into a false DUI to extort information out of him. So suddenly you've got Snowden describing exactly what Birkenfeld told me happened and told others about CIA and developing him in a DUI to get information out of him. So you have Snowden, Birkenfeld, and right in the middle is Jesselyn Radick, who's represented both of them. And Jesselyn Radick knows me from Birkenfeld and my attorney in Washington. So she's right at the hub. She's the center of the wheel, if you will, that's connected all three of us. And about September 25th, 2012 was when I wrote my report to U.S. Civil Affairs Psychological Operations Command General Jeffrey Jacobs saying, "Sir, I am an officer in the United States Army. I'm illegally imprisoned in a federal prison for duties I was performing as a military officer. It's unconstitutional. I've requested military attorneys. Please debrief me. In addition, I've discovered material that's essential to our mission dealing with threat finance, specifically Swiss bank accounts." And I outlined in that report all of the Birkenfeld materials and sent it up the chain of command. Sent it to General Jeffrey Jacobs, sent it to his subordinate, a Lieutenant Colonel Bockham Folk at Fort Bragg, and then proceeded to send it on to the House and Senate Armed Services Committees, Intelligence Committees, Dianne Feinstein, Buck McKeon, John Boehner, about over 100 senators and congressmen. And none of them did anything with it, didn't do a single thing, ignored it completely, tried to completely cover it up and bury it. And about three months after that was when Snowden saw my report bouncing around the TSSCI channels, and Snowden was a Booz Allen Hamilton man, saw my report and started connecting the dots, recognized Birkenfeld and what had happened to him in Switzerland, and then shortly after that contacted Laura Patras, Glenn Greenwald, and then a few months later got out, went to Hong Kong, and made all of his information known. So a lot of things are interconnected. A lot of dominoes were falling, but they're all interrelated, and so you couldn't make it up. It's all documented.
From what I'm understanding, and what I would really love the listeners to understand is that you were kind of like the first dozen of dominoes that set the chain of events in place that eventually ended up in Edward Snowden and, say, for example, Chelsea Manning taking the steps that they took to really ensure that the public became aware of what was going on in the financing of terrorism, and that there were good American people doing their jobs that were being roadblocked by a certain faction of the government that had either been coerced or cowtailed into submission, and basically they had sold out one way or another, whether it was by, since Posse Comitatus is gone, and Blackwater has been given contracts to operate on American soil. At this point, we don't know if these factions of government have been literally threatened, or their loved ones have been threatened for their lives, or if they have, been bought out financially, or if they've got some skeleton in their closet, which most people who make it anywhere do, that is held over their heads. So at this point, what we're now getting to is the good stuff. And what I really, before we go to break here, in a few minutes, what I really want the listeners to hear is the due diligence that you did effectively in your career to gather the evidence and systematically document all of the information that then led to people like Snowden taking the steps that they did. That information is available on your website, and you have geniusly created 3 books that are very cost effective and fair priced. Anyone out there can afford these books and can literally go onto your website right now and download these 3 reports that you've now made into books, which is genius because, let's face it, this is the golden egg. Your work is the golden egg. Your work is what the fuss is all about. And this is really what the American people need. They need this in their fingertips. They need somebody that can walk them through it no matter what their background is. They need to understand where their tax dollars have gone and why people such as yourself and Snowden were so committed, and Chelsea Manning, to, literally giving up the rest of their lives for their oaths that they have sworn a duty to protect and defend the Constitution against foreign and domestic skullduggery. That's exactly precisely right. And those documents are court exhibits. Those documents have been submitted to the Florida Federal District Court, and they will be exhibits brought in to the criminal case, which is coming to a head over the next few months. And they will be used, and they've been, over the last 2 years, they've been sent to the court, and it's taken this long to get this back in front of the court. But it's amazing because the court's fully aware of it. Judge Virginia Hernandez Covington is fully aware of it. Now, another thing that just came to me lately, someone sent me, that the law firm in Washington, D.C., Covington and Burling, where Eric Holder and Lanny Brewer worked before they went to the Department of Justice, that law firm represented Union Bank of Switzerland. My judge is Judge Virginia Hernandez Covington, connected family-wise to the law firm Covington and Burling in Washington, D.C. I never knew that until much, much later. Are there weird connections? Are there weird familiarities? Obviously so. Covington was appointed by the Bush administration. She should have recused herself entirely from my case because she lectures at universities where Booz Allen gives money. But there are some real strange connections that are involved in this. But the documents that are books on the case are all, printed at cost. But they're for people to take, to learn, and then to call their congressmen and senators and media and say, what have you done about this? Here's a military officer who's reported financing that's now going to ISIS and ISIL and all the Syria campaigns and the Iraqi episodes. And you've been given this material since 2012, and you've never done anything about it. You've never contacted Bennett. You've never debriefed Bennett. You've never debriefed Birkenfeld. In fact, you've covered it up. You bribed him $104 million. And all of that is in plain black and white. And the American citizen can take that and go right to the wall with their congressmen or their senators and pin them and say, you are in violation of your oath as a political representative.
You've committed treason against the United States. There's a legal case for that. And you've also caused men and women to die and lose their legs and arms because they've been blown up by roadside bombs or bullets that have been purchased with dollars and euros that have been funneled through Swiss bank accounts that Brad Birkenfeld brought to you and Scott Bennett brought to you. And that's part of the information that Snowden and the WikiLeaks cables will be releasing pretty soon.
See, and I really want to say that for everybody out there listening, we've seen a rise in the consciousness of, the entire planet. But at the hub of it, the United States dollar is really, the driving force mechanism. And what people have been trying, very deliberately to good American people who are in service to the people, what they've been trying to do is expose the fact that the wealth of tax dollars that people have been, working their blood, sweat, and tears and then donating to their government and their country, that it has been going to facilitate the bombing and the global positioning for oil in Eurasia and the false flag setup of Baloney Benghazi and the Osama bin Laden raid. These types of things are all propaganda to facilitate good people such as yourself continuing to do their job without asking questions. But luckily, you have a heart that is big enough, and we've learned in the last century that the heart has more neurotransmitters than the brain does. Yeah. And your heart has been strong enough to really do a phenomenal, amazing job, because by all intents and purposes, you should have given up a long time ago, and you should not be doing as well as you're doing now, with this big smile on your face.
Yeah.
And really, the people, this needs to get out to the people in a way that they can comprehend it and understand. And one of the things that I wanted to say in regards to Jesslyn Raddick and Gap, it could be that, at the end of the day, they do have, investors that really call the shots around statistical.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. And, maybe perhaps you somehow got in the criteria with Snowden coming up, got bumped to the back burner.
Well, you're exactly right, and I understand that. I understand. I'm not into this whole thing for any purpose other than to make the truth known, to honor my oath as an officer, and serve the American people by giving them intelligence information that's not classified that they would want to know.
Absolutely. We're going to go to break, and we're going to be right back with my guest, Scott Bennett. Thanks, everyone.